Yeah. So what's your new video going to be about? About how crappy this Eastern European guy's English is. What? Dude, you know that's a lose-lose situation, right? Even if people agree with you on the English, you'll just look like an idiot for punching down to a non-native speaker. Yeah, I know, but look what he wrote. Oof. Yeah, okay, but I think you at least have to give the video some kind of message or something. Good thinking. So in a recent video from Kangaroo English, which is an Australian channel about learning English, he advises that one thing that will improve your English is to put the grammar book down. Now it's important to understand the context of Christian's statement here. He's not saying that you don't need to understand grammar in order to speak English. He himself has videos about English grammar and various tenses, etc. It's just that it's very common for students of English, particularly those from certain parts of the world, to massively overstudy grammar. Like, as a general rule for English as a second language, I would say that far more students study grammar too much rather than too little. And it doesn't work for English or any other language, and that's what we're going to see here today. And hopefully you're as entertained by this guy's comments as I was. Hi Christian, from time to time when I get suggestions of YouTube, I watch your videos. Mostly I agree with your ideas and even more I like the way you give a material. But there's the only thing I totally disagree with you, and this is your attitude to a grammar. I'm absolutely convinced that the grammar knowledge is the most important for a second language learning, and there's nothing more important for learning and understanding a second language than a grammar. An English learner may not know the grammar of his own language because he understands it more or less on his birthright. But when it comes to a second language grammar, that trick just doesn't work. No one is able to read text, no matter scientific or of the other kind. There are two types of texts in the world: scientific and the other kind. No one can speak or write properly unless he understands how that huge and complicated machine, a grammar, works. In my humble opinion, which we're going to see in a second is not humble at all, no one linguistic skill could be compared with a grammar knowledge as more important. I'm sure you understand that they didn't want to be offensive. Have yourself a happy new year, Christian. Okay, so at this point I was like, that's fine. He's not necessarily claiming to have actually attained this level of understanding of English grammar and English in general. So the fact that the level of English that he demonstrates is lower than that which he's pointing to isn't necessarily an inherent contradiction. Should I have gotten involved? No. Did I? Yes. It wouldn't be fair for me to portray poor Zlatov, as I'm going to call him in this video, as your stereotypical USSR comrade without doing the same thing to myself. So I'm going to go with the somewhat more obscure Australian politician addressing the parliament. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, sir, and my respects to Donald Bradman. With due respect to Mr. Zlatov, I think what the leader of the opposition is saying, sir, is that just sitting and memorizing grammar rules is not useful. You need to understand grammar, but the way you do that is actually not by reading about grammar. You learn grammar by seeing, hearing, and using the language in thousands and thousands of settings, Mr. Speaker, and eventually understanding where each kind of word is used and why. But going straight to the last step, Mr. Speaker, sir, is not going to work. So basically, I was trying to clarify what I felt that the message of the video actually was, and I thought on that point we would probably actually agree, and I didn't think the guy would bother replying. Lucky for me, he did. Yes, he is, and that's exactly the point I strongly criticize. All grammar rules must be memorized, and each student must strongly understand all possible ways of interaction between grammar rules and grammar forms that based on 12 tenses. A student must clearly understand all possible interacts and relationships of grammar forms. A student must understand all this in a such perfect and clear way that he could be able to explain to the other person the gist of each one of 12 tenses, the difference between gerund and perfect gerund, direct form of perfect infinitive and perfect infinitive with modal verbs, and so on. A student must be educated so perfectly that he could substitute a teacher if there would be a need. English language is an exact subject and should be taught and learned the same way like physics or mathematics.
Doing that voice is exhausting.
A student must understand all this in such a perfect and clear way that he could be able to explain to the other person.
I'm guessing people are just like books, scientific and the other kind, and you and the other person. My favourite part about this whole comment is the use of the word gist, because it so clearly mismatches the tone of the rest of the comment.
I speak not English perfectly, but I'm comprehending the gist, physics, mathematics, English language, astrology, all that mumbo jumbo.
With this reply, it did cross my mind, of course, that he could be trolling, or at the very least that if called out on this completely ridiculous statement, he might at least then claim to have been trolling, which is what a lot of people do when you're like, you made more mistakes than you used words. They'll be like, yeah, well, I'm a university professor of Shakespeare and I was just trolling you because it's so entertaining. Yeah, that's a good defense, because as an important and influential person, internet arguments would be how you spend your time, right? Dude, aren't you just having an internet argument right now? I'm gonna go with no. I'm not gonna read out the reply because it basically just corrects some of the main errors that are in his comment. Again, he's still never actually claimed that his English is perfect, so I even complimented him on his English because he is having a go at some tricky stuff and mostly failing, but having a go is having a go. So I just said that the reply was funny because it's so extreme in its message. Like, what's with saying a student must be educated so perfectly that he could substitute a teacher if there were to ever be a need? What do you mean? What good would a teacher be if the student were every bit his or her equal? That doesn't even make sense. Or as some people might put it,
it has not even a logical gist.
So in general, I didn't say anything too harsh to him other than to correct his English, but even there I went easy. Well, let me tell you, in his reply, my leniency was not reciprocated.
Your teacher of the English language should have been punished for his inability to teach. Just believe me, your last comment contains a bunch of grammar mistakes. I've got no time and will to correct your grammar mistakes. I've looked through my comment and found a couple of unimportant mistakes, mostly articles. If you don't mind, I'd like to remind you that English isn't even my native language.
Oh, no way, I had forgotten about that.
And if someday you get to the level of the English language like mine is, then you'll be the luckiest one.
Oh, la-di-da.
And once again, remember, if you meet your English teacher, you'll have the right to spit in his face. Believe me, your English teacher deserves that of you.
It's at this point that I realized that there is no trolling here. It's just 100% pure hubris, and I need to unpack this because this comment is a thing of beauty. Presumably, he doesn't know that I'm a native speaker, and that's fair enough. I never said I was. But imagine even saying this to anyone, especially a student of English. Your English is so bad that your teacher should be punished, and we'll come back to that. The next little sequence is my favorite. Just believe me, your last comment contains a bunch of grammar mistakes. I've got no time and will to correct your grammar mistakes. He was doing so well with the first part, it's probably the longest he goes in this whole thing without screwing something up. But then he says, I've got no time and will, which is only 6 words, but when you try to correct it, you realize it's about 6 steps away from actually sounding like natural English. And then I've looked through my comment and found a couple of unimportant mistakes. Zlatov, I'm sorry to tell you that proofreading your own English when your English is as it is doesn't work. It reminds me of this story about 10 years ago or something from Sydney where this guy was arrested for running a driving school when he himself didn't even have a license.
I'll teach you to drive a car.
Okay, can you drive a car?
I perfectly understand the gist of it.
And if someday you get to the level of English language like mine is, you'll be the luckiest one. Again, this concept that there are only 2 people, me and him, so if I'm luckier than him, then I'm the luckiest one. I'd be really interested to know what his native language is and if that language has some kind of strong concept of duality, like there being 2 classes of everything. You know, scientific book, other book. One person, other person. Unlucky person, luckiest person.
And once again, remember that if you meet your English teacher, you'll have the right to spit in his face.
Whoa, that escalated. Before it was just that he should be punished. Now I have the right to spit in his face? Oh, and just a quick note, what you said there would actually imply that the act of meeting him would be what would give me the right to spit in his face. So I'll remind my dad next time I see him that he should be wearing a face mask, because
Zlatov says, you deserve for me to spit in your face.
And just when I thought this situation couldn't get any weirder, he adds a postscript.
Oh, and please excuse me, I've forgotten to say that I didn't mean any offend. It's just a severe truth.
How do you learn English so closely adhering to a grammar or a textbook, believing so strongly that it is just like maths, without learning the difference between nouns, adjectives, and verbs? If anything in English or any language can be learned by a textbook, it's that stuff. True, adjective, truth, noun, offend, verb, offensive, adjective, offense, noun. I'm not saying that grammar is not important. In fact, the best definition I've heard so far of fluency in a language is from Christian at Kangaroo English, who said that fluency is a matter of having automatic control of the grammar into which you can then place vocabulary. That's an excellent definition of a fluency scale as far as I'm concerned. So having some automatic control would be like down here, and having complete automatic control would be up here, completely fluent, and the same with vocabulary. Some vocabulary down here, lots of vocabulary up here. But studying a language as if it's mathematics, as he puts it, which by the way, isn't always the cut and dried matter that it's meant to be. People talk about maths as if it's this fixed thing with an answer and just that's it. But there are inconsistencies within mathematics that mathematicians argue over all the time. That's why there are still mathematicians. But anyway, studying a language in this very textbook way clearly doesn't work. And worse than that, it seems that in this case, the guy has basically been brainwashed into thinking that the way he studied English had 100% coverage. It was a flawless system. And he's so convinced of that, that anytime he sees something which disagrees with his English, which when you think about it must be all the time, right? He thinks, no, that's wrong. So there's a whole different danger with studying a language like this. Put in a sentence, strictly adhering to a single method of teaching produces a narrow and incorrect understanding of a large and complex entity, and in some cases convinces the learner that anything outside of that incorrect understanding must in itself be incorrect. So, two messages for this video. One, I don't know who said it first, but I've seen Benny Lewis quoted, and that is that basically grammar is like medicine. It's extremely helpful in small doses at the right times, and it can be deadly if all taken at once at the wrong times. So, go out there and listen to stuff in your target language, YouTube videos, talk to people, read books, novels and non-fiction, blogs, engage properly with the language. And two, do not argue with native speakers, even if you are sure you are right. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this and got something out of it. From now on, this channel is going to feature a mix of language learning content. There'll be the not so serious stuff like this video, and then there'll be more direct tips and my experiences with certain techniques for studying languages, and once a month, which I'm really excited about, there will be a holistic language learning video. Holistic language learning is basically the idea of improving your learning methods and then using that experience to improve your life. It's kind of complex, so if you want to know more about that, there's a video about it right here. This year, I want to make Days of French and Swedish the most entertaining language learning channel out there, and you can join in by subscribing. Thank you guys, have a good one.